2 years ago, I couldn't get out of bed and I wanted to die every single minute. And every breath I took felt like a labor, like it was a chore to breathe. And now I can't breathe enough. For many years as a teen, I felt like a freak, I felt like an anomaly and that I was all alone and that no one could ever possibly love me because of my brain and who I was, and that no one would ever understand me and that I would be by myself for forever. And because nobody was talking about those sorts of things when I was younger, I was so isolated. I was so isolated in my brain. My brain was my prison, and I lived there all by myself.
I remember sitting outside the classroom and just screaming and being taken away. They didn't have timeout rooms then, but I remember being taken to the nurse's room, and they would lock the door and I would be in there all by myself and just cry and scream, and they would tell me, like, when you're calm, you can go back to class. But I remember being like, oh, they're trying to punish me for this. Like, the way I'm feeling is bad.
The best way I can describe it is a lot of times feeling like I was sort of having to operate my body by remote control. So, there was the me that was out there talking and doing things, and then there was the me that was kind of trapped in the back of my head, always living with the radio on that's not tuned into a channel. So this constant static that sort of made it really difficult to hear and see and focus on stuff in the world around me.
I think just stress of life kind of just got to me to the point where I couldn't bottle it up anymore. And yeah, I knew I needed help.
For young mothers, there's a lot of messaging that this is the happiest time of your life, and they're only small once, and you have to savor every moment and don't miss a thing, and how lucky and how happy you are. And I was dying inside, and I would get those messages, and I was barely functioning for the first, especially 6 months of motherhood. As much as I've always been proud to be a mother and loved my daughter, boy, I did not love myself at that time.
Well, one of the biggest differences for me is that I grew up in the system. So I moved over 54 times in 12 years. Going through that experience, I already felt that I was different. I moved around so much, and they said that they couldn't handle me. But really, it was just because I was deaf. I did experience some mental health issues from abuse I experienced growing up, and I reacted to that. But I always knew I was different. I wasn't the same as other people.
I didn't know why. I didn't understand what was happening to me. But I was becoming what I would call an emotional mess.
Like, I think that's the other thing with depression, is that you feel it becomes who you are, and it's not. And the big thing is not to let it own you, because it will try. And that's the thing. It will silence you, and it will try to own you.
I would go to school, I would come home, I would go to bed, and I would cry for 2 hours and fall asleep. And I was terrified to talk to someone about it.
I knew I didn't want to end my life, but if I was getting those thoughts anyways, so I didn't really know what was going on.
I felt responsible for it. I felt like there was something that I was doing wrong, something that I wasn't tough enough, or that I wasn't a good kid, or yeah, I really blamed myself. And looking back at it, for like an 11-year-old kid to blame themselves for being sad, it's so crushing to think about.
So when I was in 19 or 20, I was really struggling with my mental health, and my dad and my stepmom thought that maybe sending me to Nepal or sending me on a trip would help. The night before I left, my boyfriend at the time taught me how to use this film camera that I had. My dad gave me this old Pentax ME Super, but I had never picked it up. I was so sick when I was in Nepal. Like, maybe the sickest I've ever been in my life, bordering on like psychosis sick. And I used that camera to connect with people for the very first time. Like, it was the very first time that I connected with the world outside of myself. My brain for so long was like a prison, and I was so stuck there. And then photography allowed me to get outside of that. It was the most amazing break or like reprieve from my head. And if it weren't for that camera, I don't think I would have made it home from Nepal. Like, I was so sick. In so many ways, photography kind of saved my life.
So within the Asian community, we don't talk about mental illness or mental health in a positive way. Growing up as a kid, it was definitely, no, whoever has like a mental illness is basically crazy. Like, the word that we use is crazy. Obviously, coming from that is the reason why I couldn't really tell anyone in my family. And that's what stigma is to me, is just you can't openly discuss it. It sucks. Like, I don't even know another word to explain. Like, it hurts. It's very unfortunate. It's not fair.
Because I'm a teacher, I had this idea in my mind that if people found out that I lived with mental illness, that I wouldn't get a job, that I would have the stigma, that people wouldn't trust me. I don't know, all the things that we tell ourselves about our sickness. I feel like a lot of men really struggle with admitting or asking for help. And I think that being able to speak so openly and freely about my journey has allowed other men to open up about theirs.
The fact that suicide is one of the leading causes of death for young men over so many other conditions that a person could have, suicide, self-harm. I have hope for the death of stigma regarding mental health, maybe even in my lifetime, but it's going to be some heavy work. I think that a lot of the internalized hate that we have for our own limitations is a result of so much social conditioning. And I think that's how stigma is manifest in me. I downplay it, I pass it off as a joke, or simply don't mention it. Hey, how are you? Oh man, I'm great. I'm not great. This is like how I get through the day, taking what makes me feel awful and trying to like lighten it, trying to lessen it.
It's not only that I have a mental health stigma, I have a stigma for being a deaf person as well. Being in hearing dominated spaces is already difficult enough, and it feels even 10 times worse because of the issues I face. For example, being in the hospital. I was hospitalized last year for a month, and it was really hard to get an interpreter because Alberta Health Services would not cover an interpreter for all day, only for a few hours a day, just to see a psychiatrist. So how am I supposed to get the same type of treatment as hearing people? They discharged me right away, and I hadn't even really been treated yet. It's all because they didn't want to cover the cost of an interpreter, and they would rather discharge me.
After I started taking photos in Nepal and being able to connect with people, I thought, I really want to take photos of people with mental health issues and share their stories. Like, I wanted to do this big photo project and finally put faces and names behind mental illness and like start giving a face so that people could identify with one another. And it started off with portraits, and then it became, we all believe in you. And then from there, I started a Facebook group. I wanted it to become something even bigger than that once I got well. And I noticed that there was an overwhelming need for people to actually meet in person. It's just rapidly growing and growing and growing. So it's happened way faster than I ever could have anticipated, which speaks to the fact that it's so needed.
I think one of the biggest barriers for me was also religion. I grew up in evangelical Christian home and in that circle, and I have vivid memory all through my childhood until I left religion. people saying mental illness is not a real thing. You've opened yourself up to the devil, to the curses, and you need to repent and pray for healing. And the number of times I knelt and wept at an altar begging for healing with no response. I couldn't count how many times. And never came. So admitting that not only were you sick, but also admitting that your faith wasn't strong enough for the Lord to heal you, it was too much. It was too much. That on top of being a big dude who, up until becoming a teacher, I worked with tools. I was a tradesman. And so I was the big, strong, bearded, tattooed guy who's supposed to believe that Jesus was going to save me from this. And none of that was enough to save me from it.
I feel like I identify as too many things for some people. Like, I'm a woman of color, I'm gay, I have anxiety, I have depression, like all of these things. And I'm like, I have to pick one for this to be accepted. Like, I can't put everything on it. So it's like, today am I anxious or am I depressed? Today am I gay or am I doing this? And so when I first came out, I really felt like if someone was like, hey, tell me a bit about you, I'd be like, I like the color blue. Like, whereas now I'm like, well, do you have time to hear my grocery list of things? And so it did feel like a boundary of, if I'm gonna talk about my mental health, I'm gonna have to talk about my life. And having someone who's gonna accept my mental health is already such a difficult thing to find. Then finding someone who's gonna accept that and my sexuality, I was like, oh, there's not even a point. Which I don't feel like now, but at first it was very daunting.
We need to talk about it. We need to connect people to resources. People don't know what to do. Like, I've talked on Twitter, for example, about people are like, well, how do I go about finding a therapist? How do I know a therapist is right for me? Like, how do I do this? And people don't know. And so for me, it just always, I guess because I've lived with it and it's my reality, but also I kind of want to help people. So that's why I've been pretty open about it.
I mean, it's a time in your life where you need to be able to advocate for yourself, but the condition of your health is such that it's incredibly difficult to advocate for yourself.
I need health benefits. I do. It's terrible that I do. It's terrible that I need health benefits to pay for medication that prevents me from dying. I think that pharmacare from the Canadian government should be the #1 priority of every politician, to see to it that people don't have to choose between meds and food.
Mental illness is not something that in police work, anyway, in those days you talked about. You suck it up and you get on with it, period. There's no one to talk to, not even your best friends, because they don't want to talk about it either. So we go through life pretending that we're okay, and we're not. It's not just one incident, one event. It's an accumulation of a career of events that pile on top of each other. We would push them away, put them on an imaginary shelf or in an imaginary cabinet. The problem with those is they have finite capacity, as does our ability to cope.
Doing the meetings has been the most frightening thing that I think I've ever done, but definitely has been the most incredible to witness. Like, when you see someone who's like, I almost ended my life last week, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to end my life this week, and you are like, I really hope I'll see you next meeting, and they come the next meeting, and then they come the next meeting, and then they come the next meeting, and then they're hanging out with other people in the meeting. And that's the change that I want to see. Just people having a community, and so that they can feel less alone. And if that changes the world, then awesome. But right now I'm just focused on those people coming back to the meetings. So
the feeling of sharing something among people I'd never met before, and the amount of support I felt in that room that night, I knew I was going back. I didn't feel alone anymore. I felt comfortable. I felt safe.
In many of the mental health groups that are out there, They never allowed me to participate because I needed to have an interpreter. WABE was the first one that allowed me to have an interpreter. A lot of those groups that are out there felt that there was a confidentiality issue with having an interpreter in the room. But interpreters already follow a code of ethics. They still said no to me, so I wasn't able to participate in any of those groups until I contacted WABE and Blake said yes. And that's been really nice.
It's saving lives. Like, that's what's happening behind those doors. For me, it's saved my life it's saving my life in quite a few ways now. The second meeting I ever went to, there was a member there that shared about their first realization of suicidal thoughts. And that share for me made me realize that I had suicidal thoughts, even though I had never attempted. I had thought about it a lot, and it was just so common to me that I didn't think anything of it. I came away from that meeting feeling better, even though I had realized that I was suicidal. I gained a tool to help save my life. And I've seen that happen, like, with other people there too. So I know I'm not alone in that either.
I'm not alone. That's the biggest thing. I always felt so isolated and alone that I had to deal with all of these things on my own and all of my thoughts on my own. Since I've been going to WABE and chatting with Blake, it's been so nice just to have people out there who are supporting each other in this. It's been really wonderful so far. I've only been going for a very brief period of time, but my life has changed significantly. I'm not as suicidal as I was before I started going to WABE, and I was before. I was so done. But now, I feel like I can move on, and I'm moving on to a better place in my life, and it's going really well.
I don't know what it is, but I think there's something much larger at work. I don't necessarily 100% believe that it was just me coming up with this thing, with this big grandiose idea that just happened. I feel like my life has been a series of sequence of events that has been preparing me for this moment. So when it's all happening, it's like I'm just actualizing what I was just put here to do. The common thread of mental illness is isolation and feeling like you're a freak and alone and nobody loves you and nobody understands, and that people with mental health issues are just seeking understanding and validation and a community. And that's all really WABE is a community of people who get it. It's awesome, WABE is awesome, but it's not this like mind-blowing concept. It's very simple. It's just a community of people who want to understand one another, and we hang out. And so when I'm sitting in a group with 25 people and they're sharing, and sometimes I get so overwhelmed with emotion just because it's so cool to have been given this opportunity from where I was given it from. It finally put some purpose to 23 years of feeling like, because it's really crappy to look back and go, oh, well, I struggled for 23 years and like there's no reason behind it except for that you needed to suffer. So it's been helpful for me to process what has happened to me in my life.
Something depression has taught me is to stop beating up on myself for being a sensitive person. It's been almost 40 years. I have been trying to grow that thicker skin. I have been completely unsuccessful. I do not have a thick skin. I have a thin skin, thin as tissue paper. And increasingly, I'm glad, because I would rather be the kind of person who is affected by the world.
Like, it sucks and it's exhausting and it's hard, but I can't give up, because if I gave up when I wanted to at 16, I wouldn't have fallen in love. And if I'd given up when I wanted to at 18, I wouldn't have gotten my degree. And if I gave up when I was 20, I wouldn't have met my youngest cousin. There are new experiences and better things to come.
You can get better, like you can, because I did. And I was seriously like, I lived in the psych ward for a month. you know, and I would walk across the high-level bridge and think about throwing myself off it, and I didn't.
I think this is my greatest gift, is talking about it and changing the views and making sure that my kids or youth that I work with don't grow up to feel like they can't talk about mental illness or they can't talk about the struggles that they're going through.
I don't hide it from my students. I don't hide it from my administration. I'm brutally honest about it. That is freeing for other people. So I'm willing to take that risk, I guess, to help other people get free, because I didn't get diagnosed until I was 30. I struggled for 30 years not knowing what was wrong with my brain. If I can help a kid who's 14, 15, 16 figure out that there's nothing wrong with them, they are just, you know, sick, my God, that's 15 years that they can get back, that I can never get back. And if my struggle can help them, then that's worth it, you know?
So there is that fear sometimes of slipping back. But what I've come to recognize really is that, you know, things are never as dire as that voice in my back of my head wants to make it seem. I think we all have days when we're not going to be at 100%. We're going to have times that we're going to stumble and we make mistakes. But when you put in the work and the effort and you gain that ground, you know, you never slip back 100%. It's kind of like mountain climbing. When you're free climbing on the rock, you know, and you're sort of putting in these anchors in the rock, right? So you'll climb a few feet, you put in another anchor, you climb a few feet, put in another anchor, and you tie off the rope. So you may fall, and you may fall a couple feet, but you're going to fall as far as that last anchor. And it's going to hold, you're going to get back on the rock, and you're going to keep going.
I will have moments where I'm doing really great and moments where I'm not doing so great. So I live out my moments preparing myself somewhat for the moments where I'm not doing so great. Getting my toolbox ready, you know, finding the resources. I'll never be like normal, but then what is, you know? So I just know that I'll live my life with this for forever, and that's okay. It's okay to me, like, I'm crying because I don't know that I've ever felt that way. It's taken me a really long time to just be okay with it. I think actually maybe Wavy has helped in that sense. That's just it. And Wavy is very much like a movement of acceptance. We love our community regardless of their struggles, and we love one another just because. And we see the person as a whole, not just their illness. I don't ask anyone what their diagnosis is. You know, I don't care. And when a person walks in this door, they're not coming in as their illness. They're coming in as who they are as a person. And that's who I love. And it's cool. Wavy helps me as much as it helps other people. So I feel just as lucky as everyone else does to be a part of it. So